So, welcome back. Just three stations tonight. So we're moving on. So we've got 8, 9, and 10. And then the next 2 weeks there are only two because I thought they were the more serious things to look at. So we're going to start tonight with one of the stations that is recorded in the Bible. So Mike's just coming. As I've said, as when we've done it the previous few weeks, some things are in the Bible and some things are part of the mythology that's been built up around it. But we start tonight with Jesus meeting the women of Jerusalem. So I'm just going to read that passage which comes from Luke 23. A large crowd of people followed him. Among them were some women who were weeping and wailing for him. Jesus turned to them and said, "Women of Jerusalem, don't cry for me, but for yourselves and your children. For the days are coming when people will say, 'How lucky are the women who never had children, who never bore babies, who never nursed them.' That will be the time when people will say to the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and to the hills, 'Hide us.' For if such things as these are done when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry?" The women of Jerusalem sometimes are described as they are there as the wailing women. And it's an interesting question whether they were just those who are out for, as we talked earlier, about wanting to go and see a good execution. And also there is some theory that women could even be paid to follow the crowd and to weep and wail because it was part of what should happen. If you were to have a good death, you needed plenty of grief around it. But I think one of my questions this evening really is, so what's going on? What's the conversation that's going on? And I'm starting where I often finish this series of pictures with this modern picture. And you can see there is Jesus in the middle and the two women who look exactly like Mary did last week on either side. Interestingly, one with blue eyes and one with brown eyes. And it's the conversation that's part of the picture. If you look, it's a little faint, but Jesus is speaking and the woman on the left has got an exclamation mark over her head and the woman on the right has a question mark over her head, as if one is saying, "What is going on here?" And the other one saying, "What's going on here?" So my little test for you this evening, and please jump in at any point, but you'll see what I mean as we proceed, particularly with the first few pictures. What is the nature of the conversation? Because in that reading, there is a conversation going on. They come and they are weeping and wailing, and Jesus says things which in a way seem quite harsh, really. Blessed are the women who never will have a child. So what do you think is going on, and what do you think is in the mind of the artist, and what conversation are they trying to put over? And we come first of all to Margaret Adams Parker and this image. I said to you last week that these images of hers have been picked up by the Church of Scotland this year, and they have been put into a series of prayers and meditations by Reverend Muriel Pearson. And the meditation that she's added onto it is that one from Lamentations about the old men sitting on the ground in silence with dust on their heads and sackcloth on their bodies, and the young women who bow their heads to the ground. Well, that's not quite what we see in the picture, is it? One woman has her head down. A young girl has her head against, presumably, her mother's breast. But the other woman is looking up and straight into the eyes of Jesus. It's possibly three generations, an older woman at the back, a young child, and the mother in between. And Jesus is looking directly at them. You'll note in this picture that there is no cross, but Jesus's hands are bound and he's got the crown of thorns on his head. So what conversation might be going on? What does that say to you about the conversation? Or what do you make of the Luke reading? I've either baffled you that you can't work out how to turn the mute off or not what to say. Sorry, Penny, carry on.
I was just going to say, you get the feeling that woman is being quite brave, really, because, there's a sense almost in which the other two can't look.
Yeah.
And yet she has the courage to look, as you say, straight into Jesus' face. And it looks as if she's speaking to him, doesn't it?
Does. Absolutely. Yeah. Yes,
So,
there's a conversation going on of which both of them are part of it. Yeah.
yeah, I think she's portrayed as courageous, I'd say.
Yes. Yes. Anybody else?
I think when I was reading it, I was very much aware of when this would have been written, probably after Jerusalem had fallen.
Yeah.
And I think that idea of what's happening is past but present but future. It's that sort of you more often see it in Hebrew rather than Greek, but it's where a certainty that something's happened.
Yeah.
But it's sort of like put in the past almost. And I think I was very struck how close it was written to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70.
Correct. Yeah.
And I think that's sort of a part prophecy, part reality of what John's writing about, or the author's writing about.
Luke. Yeah. Luke.
Luke, sorry.
It is only in Luke. It's one of those little pericope stories that is in Luke and is nowhere else, not in Matthew, Mark, or John. So it is very specific. And whilst we often think of Matthew as being the gospel more written for the Jews, Luke was possibly the one that was more written around the people who were there and part of what went on. Yeah.
And Luke had more emphasis on women as well. So
yeah, the women get good write-ups in all ways, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, very much part of
there is a footnote in the New English translation that said it talks about the women, like you say, being the wailing women.
Yeah.
Hired, but it actually mentions earlier on in one of the footnotes that these were women Jesus knew.
Yeah.
And there was that's like Chris was saying, that's what Luke would have written, that would talk to them and would have shared that what they felt at that moment.
Yeah. And of course we'll come back and find the women at the cross when all the men have run away. Yeah.
I remember when Jesus came and he died, and the two ladies came, and when Jesus said the last words, he says, "Woman, why are you weeping?"
Yeah. Yeah. He does, talking to his mother and the other Marys who are there. Yeah. Thank you, Ben. Thank you.
Okay.
I wanted to share with you, and because I think we can't go through this series of pictures without recognizing what is now happening in Israel, in Jerusalem, in Gaza. So I'm going to read the prayer that Muriel Pearson wrote, and then a bit later on I'm going to read another prayer that's more specifically about Jerusalem. So we pray. Encountering God, who meets all who look for you, we hold silence in the face of horrendous suffering. Comfort those who mourn heal those who are wounded, lift those who have fallen, and keep alight hope for a better future, where tears will be dried, and old men will rejoice, and young women will stand tall, and all who call Jerusalem home will live together in peace. In the name of the Holy One. Amen. As I say, I think as we go through this series of pictures, whilst none of them are contemporary in the sense of being addressing the current situation, I think they all do have something to say to us about the agony of the present moment as well as of the past.
What does the piece about when the tree is green? If people do these things when the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry? What does that mean?
I've always taken it to mean that it's while Jesus is with them, not later on when, you know, wood takes time to be cut down and to dry out. I think it's probably referring to something that Jesus often says, which is about when is the right time. And now is the time when this is happening. So these are happening now. And the tree is still alive. Later on, when time has passed, the tree will be dead. And it will be all the worse then. I mean, if you think about putting a log on the fire, you put a green log on the fire, it doesn't really burn. It will eventually get to that point of burning and being destroyed. But when it's dry, it will burn really quickly. So I think he's saying now is a bad time, but actually it's going to get worse. That's my interpretation. I'll look to my wife, who is the Lucan scholar, better than I, because I did John, she did Luke at university. And now she's holding her head back and saying, I'm not going to speak.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it is a prophecy of the fall of Jerusalem, and that this time will come when people wish they haven't got children because terrible things are going to happen.
Yeah.
But, and presumably it's almost saying that this thing that is happening to Jesus is the start of this terrible time, really.
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah. And I think it's no coincidence that that line is there whilst we're going to be talking about the cross, which is often referred to as a tree. So the tree that has been cut down is going to be used for the cross. And I think, again, when we get to the later pictures, when we've got those few pictures which are wooden sculptures or wooden artistic works, creative works, I think that line almost shouts out even louder. But you'll have to go and read a better commentary than I am, Daisy, to get a true answer.
I haven't got one on.
Chris was saying about sort of about them worrying about what was to come. So you were talking about women not having children. Don't you think there's a bit of that around now? You know, with that you worry about your grandchildren as to what sort of world and when new babies are born, you know, what sort of world are they coming into? Because it just, you know, things that are happening now just sort of seem horrific in some part, don't they?
They do. Yeah, and somebody expressed exactly that to me a few days ago. Somebody said, you know, I've got grandchildren, but I do really fear for what the world is going to be like for them. I think.
But did different generations before us think similarly?
That's what I was going to say. I think if we're honest, that could have been said at any decade in the past 2,000 years or the 2,000 years before that. I mean, why did people have children during, you know, in the 1930s, in the Depression, as much as before the Second World War? Why did people have children in the 50s and the 60s with the threat of nuclear war and nuclear annihilation? It is something about the resilience of humanity that we still have children, because even though we know it's going to be tough for all of them.
And we worry, for example, or our children worry about how much screen time their children use. Whereas when my children were the age of my grandchildren, I was worried about should they have a television in their bedroom, you know, which all their friends seem to be having. So I suppose it is different
the
different
same
things.
arguments were there as to whether people should have had books when they were first printed.
Yeah.
Media, that media has always been a challenge to the next generation, for sure. And it does settle down, but you do worry, and rightly at times. Yeah. Okay, let's move on. We're going to look at the other black and white pictures of Noyes Capehart, the American artist. And I found, by contrast, this was a very interesting picture because he's talking to the women, but Jesus is actually blessing that woman who's on her knees. Very different conversation, I think, than the one in the Bible. They're not weeping. They are in.
There's no sign of the cross, is there?
No, there isn't. No. And Jesus isn't bound. He's got the crown of thorns on, but there's nothing else that suggests maybe a rope around his waist, but there's nothing else that suggests he's on his way to crucifixion. But it's interesting, I think, that there is a sign of blessing. I mean, the woman on her knees could be Mary. Pick any of the Marys. I don't just mean Mary, the mother. It could be Mary Magdalene or any of the other Marys. Hands are together, a sign of devotion. Down on her knees, praying. And he comes and blesses her. I'm not entirely sure what he's doing with his right hand, though it could also be the blessing symbol. So Orthodox priests will use a blessing symbol with the hand, which is a bit like that. I don't know. And interestingly, the women are in various different costumes. So you've got somebody with a veil over their head, but somebody who's also got a veil and scarf around them, a bit more like a Berber or
Who's the person disappearing?
I don't know. I mean, I did wonder if it was Simon of Cyrene. I'll go on with the cross while you have a chat with the women, but I don't think it is because I can't see the cross there either.
It's male, isn't it?
It looks to be.
Yeah.
Because you can see the legs, which seems to be the distinction that.
I think, Peter.
Yeah.
I think that's Mary. There's the hand on.
Yeah.
And at the back there, I think that's Joseph.
We don't know that Joseph was there, Ben. We've no idea what happens to Joseph later on, do we? He doesn't mention. He's never mentioned again. Yeah. I mean, it could be one of the disciples. It could be the disciple whom Jesus loved, or one of the other disciples running away. Yeah. We don't know. Okay. I was speaking to somebody today who had been looking on the Zoom, haven't been part of this group before, and she said, as I think one or two of you have already said, that she felt the Nicholas Markel pictures are some of the most striking and some of the most meaningful. And I really feel he's pulled every trick out of the bag here, because you have the woman who's weeping, you have the arms out in supplication. Jesus is doing quite a good job carrying that cross on his back without actually having a hand on it. But it's the child that makes you stand up and look, isn't it? Remember the picture last week of Simon of Cyrene and Jesus overlain and the heart being shown. And here is a woman who is carrying a child being told it's better if babies are not to be born. Compared to some of the more intricate pictures that we look at, to use 3 colours and block pictures like this is very, very effective.
I was just thinking on that previous one, maybe there's also sort of a gender thing going on, that the women gather around Jesus, the men are trying to get away. The men are leaving.
Yeah, I think that's quite possible. Yes, Penny. So I'm going to read the prayer which is associated with this image, which comes out of the Walking the Way of the Cross book, published some years ago, with work by Stephen Cottrell, Paula Gooder, and Philip North. But I don't actually know who wrote the prayers, because they come from the Anglican service book for the Stations of the Cross. And whereas a few moments ago I read the prayer that was specifically looking at the situation in Gaza, this prayer more specifically is looking at the women of Jerusalem. And so we pray again. Lord Jesus, the women of Jerusalem wept for you. Move us to tears at the plight of the broken in our world. You embraced the pain of Jerusalem, the city of peace. Bless Jerusalem this day and lead it to the path of profound peace. To you, Jesus, the King of peace, who wept for the city of peace, be honour and glory with the Father and the Spirit, now and forever. Amen.
Amen.
One of the sadnesses is that prayer for Jerusalem could have been written, I think, almost at any date between 65 AD, the time of Jesus, and right up to today. That Jerusalem has been fought over. Just think back, the Crusades were fighting over Jerusalem, the Christians and the Muslims. It's been sacked and resacked. It's been devastated and rebuilt. And it is such a sad place that, as it says, the place that is for the Prince of Peace is the place that's been fought over.
Right back into the Old Testament time.
Indeed, yeah, indeed.
It's always been.
It has. It has. Okay, we'll move on. I put this one alongside that because it also is about the women who have children. You can see two of the women there are holding their child close. Jesus is also making a sign of blessing. But I think significantly, you have a little child here with a skull cap. So whether it is a direct allusion to Jerusalem being a Jewish city, I don't know. But I find it interesting that the women are crowded round, and it took me a moment to realize that this is actually Jesus's hand. I did wonder if the woman was actually leaning against the cross, but they're certainly coming close to him. And again, you've got them actually, two of them are looking straight into his eyes. Two of them have got their heads down. What conversation might be going on here?
You need to study the picture to find how many people there are there, don't you?
You do. Yeah, there's a lot there. Yeah. And I think there's an allusion to the green trees, because we've got some leaves in the background of the picture, whereas in the other pictures of these earlier, there were other crosses often in the background. So this is a living tree.
When you look at their faces, the women have got they look as if their brows are furrowed in distress, don't they?
Yeah.
And Jesus looks very much to me as if he's saying, it's okay. Do you know what I mean? As though it's if they're bringing their distress to him and he is offering comfort. That's what it looks like to me.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, and if they are the women who followed Jesus, as we suspect perhaps from the Luke reading, then they would have been more than dreadfully upset to see their friend, their rabbi, being taken away to be crucified. I mean, I think sometimes when we read this passage, because we talk about the wailing women who are paid to do it, who tagged on to the back of any good funeral, we don't perhaps take enough account of the fact that, and maybe that's a male reading of it, that the women would have been absolutely moved by what was going on, because this was somebody they knew, somebody who had taken them seriously, somebody who had valued them as people, not not disregarding them because they were women. So I think there is a lot of that going on, Penny. I agree.
And the fact that they've got children, and could have been the women who brought their children to Jesus.
To be blessed. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I popped in next to that the Aurelia Clark picture, which again has them all crowding in around him. She often uses these blue patterned dresses, if you remember from when we talked about it before, both in this series and in some of her earlier works. There were some of the favourite dresses that she had, some of the patterns that she wore. But the woman at the back, particularly, I think, is really in anguish over it. She looks haggard, doesn't she? But there's also a baby. There's a small child's hand down here. And I mentioned that Aurelia Clark loved children, loved having children around, and children appear in many, many of her pictures, both her religious pictures and her more secular pictures. She was always wanting to depict children. Like you said earlier, it's hard to know how many women are actually in the picture. There's 4, 5, 6.
And Jesus looks distressed in that one, doesn't he?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But almost conveying the fact that, almost conveying the idea he's distressed for them rather than for his own plight.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, grief breeds grief. If we see somebody who is distressed, it makes us grieve, it makes us upset. So otherwise we would be hard of heart if we weren't moved by somebody else's distress, wouldn't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it contrasts the red, both the red on his forehead, the red on his shoulders, the blood is flowing already with the blues and the white of the women. I put this picture in, comes from a quite different time, but I remember that I shared with you a few pictures earlier from the Smithsonian Institute in America. This comes from one of the art and theology blogs that I get. And this is the display that was done a few years ago. And they picked out artworks in the gallery that were linked to the story. So they had what they called the Stations of the Cross, but none of them were really the true stations. They were all other pictures that were available. But I put this in for two reasons. The first is because I think it really does display the anguish and the agony, but also, as you can see from the text, it's when it was done. So it's done by this man, Daniel Presley, no relation, I think, not even spelt quite the same. But he was involved with the Black Rights Movement and was very often in his artwork wanted to depict the suffering and the slavery and entrapment of Black people, even before the assassination of Martin Luther King. But he was at a service the very next day after the assassination. And I'll just read you a little bit of what it says. As Jesus processed to his death on Good Friday, the Jewish women wailed for the loss of their great leader. Daniel Presley's relief carving seen here captures that anguish, that grief, unleashed by the death of a loved one. The title, The Soprano at the Morning Easter Wake of 1968, depicts one of the singers at Martin Luther King's memorial service in Memphis the day after he was assassinated. She wrings her gloved hands and lets out an agonized moan, her eyes heavy with tears. The brim of her hat looks like a halo, and a cross dangles around her neck. Then it goes on. African Americans have a heavy cost to bear, namely a shared history of enslavement, brutality and discrimination, which in many ways is not past. King's gospel message of love, equality, and racial reconciliation was an additional cross he bore, along with many other civil rights activists, and he bore it to his death. Presley became aware of racism at a young age when his father was shot by a white neighbor on their South Carolina farm. Shortly after, he moved with his brothers and sisters up to Ohio and then struck out on his own in Harlem, where he started to carve and paint images that dealt with his experiences as a black man. He was 50 years old when King was assassinated, and he immediately responded with this emotionally intense image. He himself died just 3 years later. You can absolutely see why the gallery chose this to depict that station of the women wailing over Jesus. So we're going to look at the other two pictures that we have been sharing, which are made from wood. And this is the Jerusalem women meet him. And in a way, there is a direct connection with the previous image, because Chris Shawcross says that this is women on a peace protest. So you can see that they are holding banners with peace doves on, and the one on the right is sitting down in the road, and they are blocking the way. And it's that image where people would be peacefully protesting. One of the images that I've carried with me for a long time is of Martin Luther King and his group literally just sitting down in the road and being moved by the police, peacefully sitting there, not shouting, not screaming, not being violent, peaceful protest. And there was a film shown some years ago, a recreation of that story. And gradually it goes on to the point where the police boss is almost apoplectic, because the police constables keep going and moving the people off the road, lifting them to the sidewalk, and then somebody else takes their place. And the poor police boss knows he can't use violence against them, because how will that look? But so their peaceful process is entirely successful, because he just gets more and more frustrated that these peaceful people are doing such a good job in stopping the traffic. It was a beautiful image. But I think this image of Chris Shawcross offers a different view, doesn't it? This is women who are saying this shouldn't be happening. They're wailing, maybe, but they are protesting. They're not wailing because the death is about to happen. They're wailing to say the death shouldn't happen. What's going on here? And so again, if we link this to the modern day, where are the peace protesters? Well, they're on the streets of cities here and all around the world, trying to stop the violence that continues, holding their banners. And yes, there will be some extremists among them. Yes, there will be those who want to fight for one side or another. But I think in essence, most people, and ourselves included, would want to fight for peace, not to bring conflict, not to bring death. So again, an image that is now 25 years old speaks so loudly into the current situation. I've really struggled with this one to get it so you can see it. This is the Daughters of Jerusalem, the forestations, which are in Lincoln Cathedral. And I've shown it there in its fullness. So it's, was it 4, 5, 6 feet tall? But I've gone to a close-up of the bottom and of the top. If you look on the left-hand side, first of all, if you remember in these images from previously, Jesus is only carrying the crossbar. So the crossbar is here, and he's carrying it with the ropes that will ultimately bind him to the cross. and Jesus' head is here. I'll just make it a little bigger. Jesus' head is here with the halo. You can see his bent back, and then the crossbar is weighing him down. And that, as you can see, is at the very, very bottom of the picture. And then the women of Jerusalem are there in front of him. So there they are, beautifully laid out in all sorts of different woods. They've all got their head in their hands. They're comforting each other. They're kneeling and praying. They're weeping and wailing. And like that previous picture, they are the ones who are in the way of Jesus's path. So we have another image at the top here, which is in the middle, which has appeared in the last two images of this series, where the two soldiers are waiting with the upright of the cross. So this black piece, which looks like a cave, is actually the upright of the cross, and the two soldiers are waiting for Jesus to arrive carrying his crossbar. So that's the bottom half of the image. And then on the right-hand side, in the top half of the image, we're back into the area of peace and doves. So you can see the dove is here. You've got other people running, moving around. Quite hard to see exactly the intention of any individual one. But I think, again, this is to do with peace protests. How often when we see a protest, do we see people running away because they're running in fear? And I do wonder whether these people, these black people, dark wood people up here, are soldiers coming to disrupt the crowd, as we would often see on a film where people are protesting. Maybe they're throwing rocks or they're sitting peacefully, and then the police come shooting with tear gas, and then people begin to run away. And I was quite struck by this part of the image. Let's see if I can get it. This piece here. So we've got the dove here in a little circle, but we've also here got two faces back to back. It's almost comedy and tragedy. Is it a bit of yin and yang? If you look over on this side, and you see there's yin and yang, the symbols of the dark and the light. And this, I think, is possibly, looking both ways. It's Janus who looks to the past and the future. It's the double pictures of tragedy and comedy. I don't know, but again, there's more to what you see than meets the eye. And any inspiration you have as to what's going on, please do feel free to share it. I did look in the book, but it's not that illuminating. I'll read what it says. So the writer, first of all, quotes the Luke 23 passage and then says this: "This is a future statement. To one it means this, and to another it means that, but it is a future statement. We are all building the path that leads to the future. If we choose to build the path with a twist in it, then the future must twist that way. Hey, come on, relax, I hear you saying. You're not driving this train. Please go away while I enjoy my coffee. Yes, and please don't hassle me either. I'm not even on the train. I'm in my own car. If this happens when the tree is still green, then what will happen when the tree is dried up?" Make of that what you will, I think. I think he's saying that whilst this is a story of 2,000 years ago, maybe it is a timeless story. It's a story about past, but also present and also future. All I will say is the amount of work that's gone into this is huge, absolutely huge. It must have taken me hours and hours and hours to cut each shape and to inlay it. A real dedication, a real devotion. In a way, that's true of this one from Southwell Minster. We saw the artist last week making these images, and here is Jesus meeting the women of Jerusalem. And again, it's interesting the way the relationship is between them. The women are on the high ground, Jesus is on the low ground, on the path, and Jesus has got the full weight of the cross on his shoulders, but it seems to me that he's almost bowing and bending towards them. Yes, he's weighed down because the weight of the cross on his back, but they are the ones who are standing upright, and he is the one who is bent over. I just found that quite moving. You see it even more starkly when you look from behind. What conversation is going on there? Who holds the high ground or the moral ground?
The cross is very impressively weighty there, isn't it? That's what it feels like, because it's bending him over, and it's obviously physically huge in relation to the figures. So it does give you a bit of the impression, doesn't it, of the weight of the world being upon him, or the weight of the sin of the world, if you like. But that sort of idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, and this cross in its size follows through the whole series. It's the one thing that is constant in a way. Even Jesus is changes and is bent and buckled in different ways, but the cross is always the same. Yeah.
I just sort of thought about this. Do you think what Jesus is saying in all this is, as Penny says, the weight of the cross, the sin of the world? And his conversation with the women is saying, although there is salvation, you're still going to have to lose your babies, lose your lives. You know, that the women of Jerusalem really represent that sort of that innocence that's lost in war and destruction. And you know, just in that picture, I almost see Jesus in homage of women for what they're about to face.
Yeah. No, I think that's well put. And if, as we believe, Luke is writing that bit later, around the time of the destruction, by that point, I mean, 30, 40 years after Jesus' death and resurrection, as well as realizing that he wasn't going to come back sort of immediately and bring the end of the world, which, you know, you can see Paul wrestling with that, can't you? That the end time is getting further and further away. They must also have realized that although Jesus died on the cross and gave them great hope, that hadn't meant that their lives were significantly changed. They were, at least not in the everyday sense, the pain and the suffering. And indeed, the early Christians, I think, went through even more pain and suffering, certainly than we do now, and perhaps since over any generation of Christian people. So maybe this is an acknowledgement that, yes, something great and wonderful happened in the death and resurrection of Jesus, but that's not a guarantee that life's going to be wonderful from now on. I mean, you know, I often have to say that to people. You know, if you say you are a person of faith, that doesn't stop you getting ill, being bereaved, losing your job, whatever it might be. And indeed, in some cases, perhaps more cases than we care to realize, being a Christian makes life harder, not easier. So maybe, you know, that's all bound up with it, that Luke is in telling this story, is saying to the people of the time, yeah, Jesus died for you. Yes, he rose again for us, but we're still having a blooming tough time of it. But Jesus is there with you because he's been through it before us.
I always think, Peter, these people who say, I came to Jesus and then all my problems were solved, I struggle with that.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I came to Jesus, and that's when my problems started.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
he, you know, he gets to a point, and that's all right, but then he has to go just that bit further. Your neighbour is yourself, or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's just me.
Yeah, well, if you get called to ministry, you never know what problems you're going to get, do you? But no, I mean, seriously, I think that's right. And I think actually, in a way, dare I say, as Christians, we take on the weight of the world. I think when we look at the suffering of the world around us, it makes us feel even worse. That's not to say other people who aren't Christians don't suffer as well, but um, we can't dodge the fact that the world is an awful place and it's not as God wants it to be, which kind of compounds the issue. And so, yeah, I think you're right. You know, yeah. When you are become a follower of Jesus, it does mean picking up your cross and walking with it at times. It really does.
They're mocking Jesus because when Jesus was under the cross, and when Jesus came, and then one of them took this wine up to Jesus' mouth.
Yeah. Yeah, and that talks about suffering because it's a bitter drink, supposed to make him feel better, but it would have had bitter herbs in it. It was a bitter drink to have. Thank you, Ben. Yeah. Right, we're going to move on to the second set of pictures, and we come to the third fall. So the fall is not the end of this little sequence this evening. And as you will see in nearly all of these images, Jesus is now on the ground. And interestingly, if you look closely in this one, he's down and his crown has fallen off. His crown is there at the back, separate from his head. So in a way, it is the ultimate degradation. He's down and out. The crown has fallen off. Yes, the crown was a mocking thing. It was a symbol of persecution. But while he wore it, it was a crown because he is our king. But now he's really down. He's really flattened. And the soldier is there overbearing above him. I think William Fairbank does an amazing thing with this image because of perspective. So although it's not quite, it's not that vastly different from the pictures we've looked at before, it is a different perspective. Let's just concentrate at the top. So the cross, the upright of the cross and the two soldiers are now bigger. Jesus is getting closer and closer to the destination. The crowd are crowding around him. I think if I go to the next picture, I've got a close-up of it. The crowd are crowding around him. The crowd are threatening him. The hand gestures. You've got shaking fists. You've got hand pointing, go this way, go to the cross. And this is the theme that's been running right through William Fairbank's work. That this is Jesus who is, and this is the title, under great pressure from the crowd, he falls for the third time. It's a theme that has been running through. So the second time that Jesus falls, the title is he falls for the second time under pressure from within. And the first time, when Jesus falls the first time, the title is he falls under pressure from without. So William Fairbank is trying to identify, if you like, the changes of what's going on in his mind as well as physically in his body. Jesus again is weighed down, flattened on the ground. You can see the weight of it. Hang on, let's go back. You can see the weight of what's there on his back, pushing him downward. You can feel the gravity of it. Although it's these images are usually shown vertical, this is a flat image really. And then it's the crowd pushing around. Just imagine carrying that crossbeam through the crowd. I think I said when we did the first one of these that I did have the experience of going to Jerusalem and twice following the way of the cross through the city streets. And the thing that strikes you as you do it, whether you do it as a small group or with a huge procession, is that daily life goes on around you. So as you go through the streets, there are the stalls from the little shops, and there are people coming and going about their business. And it kind of makes sense that that's how it would have been for Jesus, that people would have been, yes, taking an interest as he went past, but he was just one of many people that went off to crucifixion. And unless you actually knew who it was, unless he was identified in some way, he was just another wrong 'un who was going to go and die. And the people would have gone about their daily business, doing their shopping, going from place to place, going to meet family and friends, going out for a drink, going to temple, going to worship. But here they are crowding in on him. It must have been incredibly hard. Just imagine walking down Oxford Street, carrying a cross on your shoulders whilst all the people are going shopping. I mean, it doesn't bear thinking about the pressure of the crowd get to you, push you down. And in Jonathan Clark's depiction, the weight really has crushed him. Going back to what you were saying, Penny, about the weight on his shoulders, now the weight's thrown him to the ground. He can't bear it any longer. I said last week I was going to try and do this, and I've put there the sequence of the 3 falls. So from left to right, the first fall, the middle one's the second fall, the right hand one, the third fall. Jesus gets lower and lower and lower. So he's down on his knees, he's down on his haunches, and then he's down facing the dirt. And the cross has slowly turned. The cross has gone from being weighted across his shoulder to being flat across his back. This is the one time I think where the sequence is important, because the artist is depicting the gradual destruction of Jesus, really. And of course, we contrast that with what's going to happen next week, which is when Jesus is crucified. So he goes from the ground to be lifted up. And I will remind you then of John's Gospel using that imagery of lifting up high.
Sorry, I didn't unmute quickly enough. I don't think.
Sorry, Penny.
I thought that one where he's absolutely flattened into the ground is really, really striking. I think I've never seen a depiction quite like that. Where he's, I mean, he looks like a piece of Play-Doh that somebody's squashed their hand down on, doesn't he?
Yeah, that's right.
Amazing.
It is. And I put that one in, but I will lead on now to some of the other imageries, and they're doing the same thing. So the Turvey Abbey, again, the 3 pictures, first, second, and third fall. You can just feel Jesus keeling over, can't you? Gradually, his head gets lower. The weight of the cross is on his shoulders and then on his back, and then pushing him to the ground. And the same with Aurelia Clark. So the left-hand one is the third fall. The right-hand 2 from left to right are the first and the second fall. So Jesus is upright and being kicked, in the second one being stabbed with a spear, in the third one the cross is absolutely on top of him. He's weighed down in every respect. But notice again, as I pointed out last week, how important the shoes are to her. The shoes become the symbol of oppression and the pain, putting the boot in quite literally. And here they are. He's down on the ground at the soldier's feet. There's nowhere else to go. And that thing's really picked up by Simon Coda. And again, with this depiction of Jesus falling for the third time, I think he's linking it with the moon in the sky. So we'll get to the point of the the sun in the sky. We'll get to the point of the eclipse when Jesus is crucified. But I mean, the weight of the crossbar there is on his head and on his arms. He's absolutely flat to the floor. Just the very fact that 2/3 of the picture is blue sky and 1/3 of the picture is Jesus in agony is in itself, I think, telling, isn't it? Beautiful composition. I picked up again, I showed you this person's work from last week, if you remember. So an African image. And again, Jesus flat out, the whole weight of the cross over him. And interestingly here, somebody coming to his help to lift the weight of the cross from him. Whether that, I mean, I'm presuming that this is Simon at this end, who's been carrying the cross, but another person now comes in and helps to relieve Jesus of the weight. And that's picked up in another image that I found online. This is from a Spanish church, a mosaic in a Spanish church. Jesus is down and out on the ground, but again, somebody has come in to pick the cross up, take the weight off him. I don't know which of these is supposed to be Simon. It's indistinct. The soldier is here, barking out the orders. And but here is Jesus flat on the ground, but at last people are coming to help him, relieve him of the pressure. I came across this sequence looking for something else, as you do. I was trying to find a picture of the third fall and came across this person's work. So this is Michael Kenny, a series of Stations of the Cross. I think I'm probably breaking copyright to actually show it to you because it's a bit, the Royal Academy is a bit strict about what it says, but I just thought I would just dare to put this one in because there is no cross, but you still get the sense of weight and agony on the back of Jesus. The whole sequence is quite interesting because they are more abstract than actuality, if you like, and they often are cross-referencing some geometric works. So can you just see on this side, there's like a set of drawings around right angles and sort of shapes you would make if you were going to make a cross. And I was looking through the sequence today, and the whole sequence is picking up other similar images, and they're often in the background. He's obviously making other references in what he's displaying. I couldn't find. You're
venturing into abstract expressionism.
I know. I'm very.
This is dangerous ground.
It is, and I haven't dared show you the other ones of his, which are even more abstract because I don't even understand some of them.
Well, the previous image of the Bruce Ornapacayo.
Yeah.
I mean, I know there's a lot of decoration, which might be seen as traditional art. Yeah. But when we're talking about journeys, there couldn't be a stronger symbolism of the two spirals in
Yeah.
the back.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yes, indeed. I mean, Peter speaks with his labyrinth view, but it's the path.
Well, if you can move to abstract expression,
the spirals are interesting because in a way they're a journey to nowhere, but a journey to everywhere, aren't they?
Mm.
to the center and back.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. And then just to finish this sequence, the last two by Margaret Adams Parker and Noyes Capehart, these black and white imagery. And again, in the left-hand one, no cross. Jesus is down on the ground. He's worn out. Interestingly, his hands are now unbound. Remember the previous picture that we looked at where his hands were bound behind his back? Now his hands are unbound. So in a way, the lower he gets, the more free he is. And in the right-hand one, he's sort of stumbling, isn't he, carrying the cross and literally falling. I mean, you can feel you want to reach out your arms and grab Jesus before he hits the deck.
What's going on in the left-hand picture with the large rectangle?
The answer is I'm not quite sure, but all of the pictures that she does are framed in that way. So the space, I think, is speaking as loudly as the content, if you see what I mean.
Right.
You kind of have to look at the sequence in order to pick it up more.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah. Then I wanted to show you this. I've said I wanted to keep showing you some new ones and different. I forgot I'd got this. I added this to my collection of artworks, as it says in 2012. I think it was probably in 2013 when I stumbled across it. This is Stations of the King's Cross pilgrimage on the Tube. It's an anonymous woman artist, and even now, 10, 12 years on, there is nothing on the internet to say who this person is. And I'll show you the actual works in a moment. But they're made into a little booklet, and the booklets were given out to people on the Circle Line. And the point was that any point on the Circle Line where you joined, if you were traveling any distance, you would eventually get to King's Cross. And so all the different stations on the journey she has associated with stations on the journey to the cross. So this is on the right-hand side, picking up on the very typical London Underground map. She's got the circle going round, and as it shows at the bottom, you can go left or right. And that's significant because when you see the images in a moment, every image has got two names of stations next to them. And one is if you're going eastbound, and one is if you're going westbound, or one is if you're going clockwise, or one is if you're going anti-clockwise. So that they balance out. You can see, for instance, you've got 2 9s, Paddington on one side, Aldgate on the other, 2 10s, Edgware Road on one side, and Liverpool Street on the other. And this is the little book. You can see it really is a little book. It's been held in her hand. And you can see there on the left-hand side, Veronica wipes the face of Jesus. And that's Cannon Street and High Street, Kensington. So if I just go back, so number 6, Cannon Street, going anti-clockwise, Kensington, if you're going clockwise. And then on the right-hand side, Jesus falls for the second time. And this is Monument and Notting Hill Gate. And then the one that we come to for this sequence, that's Jesus falls for the first time, is the temple. So I must have misread when I was looking at them. So a lovely sequence. And I say, I just stumbled back across it today. I've had it on I did use it when it first came out. And as you know, my interest in railways is such that I got quite sparked about it and then completely forgot about it. So I apologize to the artist for forgetting that they were there. And I'll show you when we come to the next sequence how she actually creates the artworks. But I just thought this was such a brilliant idea.
Mm.
going around the circle line one way or another. And you can do it anywhere, can't you? You could make a journey across the North York Moors, across the different crosses. Wouldn't it be interesting to work out a pilgrimage that link up all the crosses that are up there on the moors and Fat Betty and all of those? And trying to work out, perhaps if I had more time in the circuit, we could go and do a pilgrimage together. But you can do it anywhere. You can do it anywhere. You can do it. There must be 14 service stations between London and Leeds up the M1. There are different ways. You must of telling the story. It's really gets your creative juices going.
I was preaching at Sinnington last night and the Anglican church. And the Anglican minister said to me, I never, ever thought I'd hear a Methodist talk about the Stations of the Cross.
Oh, shame on him to think such a thing. There you go. I'll ask Christine if she will read her station for this part of the journey. Jesus falls for the third time.
Jesus falls for the third time. Did you think you would never get up? There's nothing to look forward to, only pain, exhaustion, and death. Even when you feel you can take no more, life knocks you down again and again. It all seems without purpose, without hope. Why are we born to suffer and die, to fall and fall again in the dirt? Tell me why, Son of Man. Tell me why. You rise, you have to, they drag you up. Yet in your pain, you lift your head, you set your dusty face towards the cross. Whatever awaits you, Son of Man, is it for us as well as for you? Can you rise again from the death-ridden dirt?
Often said of people who are addicted to drugs or to alcohol or indeed to anything else, that they have to get to the bottom before they can start to climb up again. Have to be at the bottom of the pit where they will acknowledge that they have a problem. And it's only when they're at the bottom that they can possibly find their way out. And it just struck me looking at those pictures of Jesus that he actually gets to the bottom. He's on the ground. He's at everybody's feet. But although the next part of the journey that we will get into next week will take him to death on the cross, actually, that's the climbing out. That's the point at which things begin to get better. And so in that, Christine is expressing our feeling often, isn't it, that life is hard and then you die. That life is tough. And why is it that way for us? And what is God going to do about it? We move on to our last sequence tonight, and that is Jesus is stripped of his garments. And you can see there how these images have been made. They've done with a cutout stencil. So if you look on the top right-hand side here, she takes a piece of card and literally cuts holes in it and then uses that as a way to stencil the picture. And the amount of work that goes into it. And she has to, if you can see, keep the letters linked together, because otherwise it wouldn't work as a stencil. It would bend and break and bits would fly off. So she's got to make sure that everything is still connected. Even the ankle here, the heel of the soldier is significant because it anchors that whole piece of the work to the edge. And of course, her picture references that when Jesus is stripped of his garments, the story comes, doesn't it, of them throwing the dice and betting for it. So it's a degradation of Jesus, but it's also kind of saying, well, his clothes are worth more than his body, that we're going to keep his coat, which is a one piece of linen, one made in one loom, and that's more important than his body that's going to be broken. I thought that was such a superb image. This one reminded me of childhood, when your mum or your dad helps you to get undressed when you're a little kid and they pull your t-shirt over your head. And I just thought, this artist has really captured exactly what it's like. You can feel the movement of the soldier. You can feel Jesus having to pull back against him. That's the only way your t-shirt comes off. Your mum or your dad pulls, but you've got to do your bit as well and pull in the opposite direction. I think the movement in that is just astonishing. It will be astonishing to put it in a picture, to create it and sculpt it out of wood. It's just amazing. I struggle again a little bit with this to know exactly what's in the artist's mind. But I will read you again what he's put. So we strip him of his clothes. We, if you note, not they, not the soldiers, not anybody else. We do it. A moment alone, a moment between torture in life and torture of dying by crucifixion. A moment of supreme awareness. A moment of one being between the body, the immediate surroundings, and the universe. And I'm not entirely sure. It doesn't say any more than that in the book, what imagery is going on here. You've got the cords coming down, and I just refer you back to the previous picture, which talks about twists and the way that things are twisted. I think this is a tree. That's this part of what Jesus is working his way towards. Jesus' naked body, and how much these are the clothes strewn and scattered on the ground. But I think it's also significant what's at the top, because I think these are tree stumps, as if the trees themselves have been stripped, cut back, cut down, in order to make the trees for crucifixion. It's one of those images that you can come back to again and again and perhaps see something slightly different every time you look at it. Is Jesus trying to climb up the rope to escape? Is Jesus putting his hand through because he's going to be bound? It's a bit like the Celtic knots, isn't it, as well, with the way that these two bits interleave. One is through the other.
The top left part that you thought was perhaps tree stumps looked like tents to me.
Yeah,
and it reminded me of a refugee camp.
There's a sunset going on in the background. It's lovely.
Yeah. I think that might be true for those. I think it was one or two of these further back that I was looking at, but I take your point exactly. Yeah. As Peter will say about abstract art, it's in the eye of the beholder. So see with his tongue in his cheek.
I think they climb into like a desert, and the holy ground.
Yeah.
And there's like a Bedouin.
Yes.
It's like that.
Yeah, Bedouin's camp. Yeah. And Jesus certainly, I mean, the crucifixion is outside the city wall. It's out into the desert wilderness a bit more than in the town, in the city. Yeah. Those who watched the little film last week of Jonathan Clark, it's just showing how he made his imageries. And if you didn't see it, it is part of the YouTube thing from last week. And if you go and see it, you can actually hear the sound. I didn't realize till afterwards that Christine told me you couldn't hear the sound from the little film. The sound was not spoken words, it was the sound of what he was doing. And part of what he does with that is to use abrasion to smooth some parts of the work down. And you can really see that in the different images that are here. So this person is, you can see, is the polystyrene that he uses in order to cast the aluminium. And Jesus's body would have been made also in polystyrene, but then it's smooth absolutely to the nth degree, as is the cross. But it's he's absolutely smoothed down. And interestingly, of course, because he's naked, you can see his legs and his feet and the space between his legs, whereas the other people still have their long cloaks on. I just love the way this cloak is on the ground, the ripples of it. It's just been thrown to the ground, taken from him and put on the ground. It's so evocative. So the Abbey sisters image is interesting because it's so many grasping hands. Perhaps it's also picking up on that thought that they all wanted to own the tunic because it was so good. Or is it that so all of them want to strip him, to make him naked, to degrade Jesus and to wear him down? And I don't know if you've noticed, as we've gone through the sequence, actually the halo gets stronger and stronger. So almost at the point where Jesus is naked before us. So his humanity is absolutely on show. His divinity is shining out more and more. And the same with Lorelia Clark, two different but similar images. She painted this image twice over, and actually it looks more as if the clothes are being torn away from him, so they're not necessarily keeping it as one piece. It's all been shredded, pulled away from his body, that's now beginning to really show the signs of agony and the anger in the faces of the men. They're almost like animals, aren't they? Look at the man just to the right of Jesus, almost licking his lips. His tongue is out. He's there. It's a primeval. We were watching a program earlier today talking about the use of the word savage, and saying that we wouldn't describe people as savages today, or if we do, it's wrong. But this is savage in the violent sense, if not in the sense of savages of Africa, which was the film that we were watching.
Peter,
Yes, Japan.
look at that.
Ah, now what are you showing me? What does it say about it, Ben? What's it called?
Well, I had a look. It's like it's a sister thing.
Oh, it's one of the sisters. Yes, I realised that. I didn't know if you could tell me what the name of the picture was.
Oh, it's McCummon's
Yes,
Stations.
that's the publisher. Yeah, yeah. Good. I must look that. I'll look it up. Thank you. Bruce on the back here has again people dressed in
there's something.
costumes of the time. Yeah. Okay, Ben.
Okay.
But you can see that the cloak that Jesus is wearing is becoming scarred with the blood, with the agony of it all, and they're just about to
The resurrection.
rip it off him.
There was called the resurrection.
Crucifixion. I'll look for it, Ben. Thank you.
Okay.
And this image of Noise Carpout takes it a stage further. So this is where they are bartering for it. So they're playing dice. That's what's going on the table. And the soldier is holding part of the robe, and this man's got another part of his robe. And the soldiers around are bartering. Crucifixion has already taken place, because one of the stories tells it as being after Jesus is already on the cross. And again, we've got those dark figures in the background, haven't we? I think this is the most stark picture. Jesus is stripped, and he's stripped back in every sense. I mean, his clothes are taken from him. He's stripped of dignity. He's stripped of power because his arms are now bound again. You can see the agony in the definition of the muscles. And he's stripped as well of his face because it's turned away from us. We can hardly bear to look at him. You can see Penny.
Some of the lines, sorry,
Yeah.
I was going to say some of the lines suggest that he's been flayed as well, don't they?
Yeah,
They could easily be whip marks.
Yeah, yeah. Which would have been done without him dressed, and because they undressed him and then dressed him again. And now, yes, all of that will show for sure. But you can see how she puts her pictures in a box. That's why that earlier picture was in a box. Yeah. It's the imagery that she uses, which actually increasing the tension of it in a way. She constrains the picture in a box. I mean, there's no reason to do it. It doesn't make any difference to the content in one way, but by putting it in a box, it sort of boxes it in literally and figuratively.
Focuses you on it.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. So that's our images for tonight. Let me just stop recording.